Dear listeners, Du Yen is delighted to welcome you back to our familiar daily broadcast with the latest short story titled, I Had Just Held My 6-week ultrasound scan when I saw my husband rushing the mistress into A&E, shouting, Doctor, my wife is about to give birth. That night, I left my keys on the shoe rack and vanished with a secret. The next day, when he returned home, he trembled at the sight he witnessed. If you find any character in this story particularly striking, please share your thoughts in the comments below the Farian video. Don't forget to give our channel a like and subscribe to continue listening to deeply emotional, real-life stories every day. Doctor, please help my wife. My wife is about to give birth. That scream tore through the hospital corridor. Right at the moment the ink on Marinid, the ultrasound printout in my hand was still warm. The tiny letters on the Brosenstein paper, which had already made me stare without blinking, suddenly blurred as if someone had just draped a layer of mist over my eyes. Intrauterine pregnancy? 6 weeks. My name is Eleanor, 29 years old, married to Arthur for nearly 4 years. That afternoon, I had gone alone to St. Jude's maternity hospital in London for a checkup because my period was more than 10 days late. I had been feeling a dull fatigue, my breasts felt heavy, and my lower abdomen occasionally twinged. Arthur had gone to a construction site since morning, and my mother-in-law had always maintained that having a child was solely my responsibility. So I hadn't told anyone. I planned to take the results home and wait until Arthur finished his dinner that evening to place this piece of paper in front of him. I thought of it as giving our increasingly cold marriage a chance to soften. But before that chance could even open its mouth, it was smashed against the wet, cold, tiled floor by the words, My wife is about to give birth. The maternity emergency triage was just down the corridor from the antenatal clinic. At first, I only turned my head because of the sharp squeak of trolley wheels on the linoleum and the urgent voices of the nurses, calling out to one another. The relatives in the waiting area stood up in a commotion. A few pregnant women, clutching their bumps, tilted their heads to look. Then I saw Arthur. He was holding a heavily pregnant woman in his arms, his shirt untucked, sweat beading on his temples even though it was a chilly autumn day outside. His normally composed, slightly aloof, and somewhat arrogant face was pale with panic. The woman in his arms was clutching his collar tightly, her hair messy over her shoulders, groaning weakly. It hurts so much, Arthur, it hurts. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, enough for me to catch every word. Chloe. The name was not unfamiliar. I had seen it flash across Arthur's phone screen during a few late-night calls. I had heard him vaguely explain that she was a sales rep for a building materials supplier, someone who worked a bit too enthusiastically and often called out of hours. Back then, I didn't ask further. Not because I trusted him absolutely, but because there are days when a woman is so exhausted that simply having a peaceful dinner is a luxury. A nurse rushed over to help support the woman, her voice urgent. Family member. Please fill out the admission forms first. How many weeks is she? Do you have her maternity notes here? Arthur didn't completely let go of her. He leaned down, supporting Chloe's back, speaking so fast his voice went hoarse. Just get my wife inside first. Money is no object. I'll sort the paperwork later. The word wife slipped out the second time, much easier than the first. The hand, holding my ultrasound scan, suddenly went slack. The piece of paper fell onto my bajin lap, slid off the edge, and caught on the corner of my handbag. The sharp edge of the paper gave me a slight paper cut on my skin. It didn't hurt much, but I still bent down to pick it up, as if it were the most important task I had to do. In that moment, on the glossy white floor tiles, the shadows of people passing by overlapped. A pair of medical clogs brushed right past the toe of my shoe. Someone said, Make way for the patient, someone else asked. Has the consent form been signed? Those sounds rolled together into a strange, noisy blur. I remained sitting on the blue plastic chair, my back stiff, my throat choking as if I had swallowed an ice cube. Arthur didn't see me, or perhaps he never imagined I could be sitting there. He was barely 10 meters away. His gray overcoat was draped over Chloe's shoulders. The hand that had once held mine to sign our marriage register, that had clumsily peeled prawns for me during our first year of marriage, was now gripping another woman's wrist so tightly, terrified that if he loosened his grip even slightly, she would disappear. The nurses wheeled Chloe inside. Arthur walked closely beside the trolley, leaning down to whisper, It's all right, I'm here. Just hold on a bit longer. Chloe gripped his hand, sobbing, Don't leave me, Arthur. I won't. Those 3 words were as light as a breath, yet heavy enough to crush my chest. A young nurse walking past glanced at the paper in my hand and gently reminded, Excuse me, please wait for the doctor to call you back in to discuss your results. At 6 weeks, you need to keep your stress levels down. Try not to be too anxious. I looked up at her. My face must have looked terribly strange because she faltered for a second. Her eyes flickered with confusion, as if she wanted to ask more, but someone called her from behind, so she hurried away. Keep your stress levels down. I looked down at the word 6 weeks on the buy. Ultrasound printout. Black ink, cold, clear font. 10 minutes ago, when the doctor said the pregnancy was safely in the uterus, my heart had beaten so fast. My palms were sweating. I had even placed a hand over my stomach, feeling ridiculously shy because it was still perfectly flat, showing no sign of a tiny life. In my mind, Arthur's face had appeared. I had imagined he would be stunned for a few seconds, then perhaps he would laugh, perhaps he would be speechless, perhaps he would clumsily ask me what I needed to eat or avoid. Even though we had grown distant over the past 4 years, I had still naively hoped this child was arriving at exactly the right time. It wasn't meant to be a rope to tie anyone down, but who knew? It might have been a small lamp in a house that had been dark for far too long. It turned out that lamp only shone for me. Inside the emergency room, Arthur's silhouette moved past the open glass door. He bent down to sign some paperwork a nurse handed him. He took the pen, signing swiftly without reading, only asking repeatedly, Is it dangerous? Does she need an emergency C-section? Both the adult and the baby must be safe. The adult and the baby. I suddenly let out a very soft laugh. The laughter slipped from my throat, so dry and quiet that it was swallowed by the tannoy calling out cue numbers. My number appeared on the screen. Patient Eleanor, room 3. The tannoy read my name. Once, then twice. The person sitting next to me nudged my arm. Excuse me, it's your turn. I stood up, but I didn't walk towards the clinic room. My feet took a step, backwards, then another. The ultrasound scan was folded in half, then into quarters, the stiff crease pressing into my fingers. I shoved it deep into my ligand coat pocket, terrified that if I exposed it, the whole world would know what a joke I had just become. A call flashed on my phone screen. It was Arthur. His name vibrated rhythmically, in the palm of my hand against the black background. Down the corridor, Arthur was standing in front of the emergency room doors, his phone pressed to his ear, staring blankly at the doors Chloe had just been wheeled through. I didn't answer. The call ended. Immediately after, a text arrived. I've got an emergency at the hospital. Will explain when I'm home tonight. I stared at those words for a long time. Perhaps he called because he remembered. He had promised to take me out for dinner with his mother tonight, or because he needed me to prepare something at home, or perhaps he texted simply out of habit, trying to maintain the shell of a marriage he hadn't yet had the chance to dismantle. My finger hovered over the screen, intending to type a question. Who is the 2A person in there? Who is your wife? And what am I? Those 3 sentences popped into my head one after another, each sharper than the last, but ultimately, the screen only reflected my reddened eyes. I locked the phone and dropped it into my handbag. The emergency room doors opened. A male doctor stepped out and asked something. Arthur immediately stepped forward, his posture rigid. He listened, nodded, continuously, and then turned back towards the administration desk. The distance between us had never been this short, yet never this insurmountably vast. A middle-aged woman sitting opposite me watched Arthur and commented to the person next to her, Look at how that husband cares for his wife. Carried her right into A&E looking white as a sheet. The other replied, Men like that are rare these days. I lowered my eyes, my fingernails digging into the straps of my handbag until my knuckles turned white. The physical pain in my fingertips helped me stand steadier against the pain in my chest. No one knew I was the legal wife of that man. No one knew that in my coat pocket there was also a piece of paper announcing the arrival of a child, let alone that this child hadn't yet been acknowledged by its father with a single word. I turned and walked towards the lifts. The hospital's glass doors reflected the dahlia silhouette of a woman in a beige trench coat, hair tied back low, face pale. I I didn't look like someone who had just received joyous news, nor did I look like someone who had just been betrayed. I just looked like a lost patient clutching her handbag, walking carefully as if terrified that tripping would cause everything inside her to shatter. Down on the ground floor, the smell of antiseptic faded, replaced by the scent of exhaust fumes and the chill of a London afternoon. Outside the hospital entrance, a line of black cabs waited for passengers. A few people selling coffee and pastries huddled under the awning. A young couple helped each other out of a car. The husband nagged while zipping up his wife's coat. I told you. To wear an extra jumper, you're always so careless. That ordinary sentence stung my eyes more than Arthur's earlier shout. I stood under the shelter for a moment, letting the cold wind rush down my collar. My phone vibrated again. Still Arthur. This time I switched it off completely. A black cab pulled up in front of me, and the driver rolled down the window. Need a ride, love? I opened the door, slid in, and gave the address for the Teliani. Belvedere Apartments in Canary Wharf. My voice sounded strangely normal. No. Trembling, no braking, no choking. The driver glanced at me through the Procedinelta rearview mirror and quietly indicated to pull out. The cab rolled forward, leaving the hospital behind. The blue and white signs blurred past the window. In my coat pocket, the ultrasound paper pressed against my chest. Every time the cab hit a bump, I reached up to hold it. Not because I was afraid of losing it, but because I was afraid I would forget that amidst all this coldness, there was still one tiny thing that required me to remain calm. Rush hour traffic was gridlocked. The sound of motorbike horns, delivery, drivers, the cabbie's phone ringing and stopping. London was as noisy as ever. It didn't slow down a single beat just because someone's heart was breaking. I watched the crowds through the window. A young woman clutching a bouquet of daisies on the back of her boyfriend's Vespa, tilting her head to dodge the wind, and laughing. A mother cycling her child home from school, the little boy nodding off, his backpack gently bumping against his mother's back. These scenes drifted past my eyes like fragments of strangers' lives while I sat in the cab, feeling so hollow I could hear the zippers of my handbag clinking against each other. By the time I reached the apartment complex, it was already dark. The concierge in the lobby was watching a Premier League match on his phone. Seeing me walk in, he looked up and smiled. Home early today, Mrs. Eleanor? I nodded. Yes, feeling a bit under the weather. Mr. Arthur isn't back yet. Earlier this afternoon, a heavily pregnant lady went up with him to grab some things. I assumed it was a relative of yours. My footsteps faltered in front of the lift. The concierge continued innocently. She was wearing pink slippers, looked quite young. Mr. Arthur brought down several bags of baby stuff to the car. Someone in the family expecting, I suppose. The lift doors opened with a soft ding. I didn't answer immediately. A man, carrying a cardboard box, stepped out, nearly bumping into my shoulder, and quickly apologized. I stepped aside, hearing my own voice escape, perfectly composed. Yes, I suppose so. The lift ascended to the 16th floor. The red numbers ticked upwards. I stood, alone in the confined space, looking at my reflection in the brushed steel panels. My lips were devoid of color. My hands hung loosely by my sides, but my fingertips were curled inwards as if gripping something invisible. My apartment with Arthur was at the end of the corridor. Outside the door sat a snake plant I had bought during our first year of marriage. Back then, Arthur had said, "This plant is resilient, just like you, Ellie. It stays green even, without much looking after." I used to smile at that comment. Only later did I understand that some people choose resilient things not out of love, but because they don't want to put in the effort to care for them. The door code was still our wedding anniversary. I pressed the digits. As the door swung open, the familiar scent of my fabric softener mingled with a strange, cloyingly sweet perfume. The sensor lights flicked on, illuminating the light brown wooden shoe rack. My black ballet flats were on the bottom shelf, next to Arthur's leather brogues, but right above them, in the exact spot I usually kept my indoor slippers, was a brand new pair of pink fluffy slippers, a size smaller than my feet. They had two soft white bows on the toes, looking so pristine they could have been unboxed that very morning. The pink slippers sat exactly in my spot. In this house, Arthur rarely paid Attention to small details. He might not remember what color my towel was, he didn't remember what perfume I was allergic to. And he certainly didn't know which drawer I kept the spare keys in. But the arrangement of shoes on the rack was different, because his mother had taught me on my very first day as her daughter-in-law that the house must be tidy. When guests arrive, one look at the shoe rack tells them whether the woman of the house knows how to manage a home. I had kept that shoe rack immaculate for nearly 4 years. Yet, just one pair of pink slippers placed there made the entire flat feel as though it no longer recognized me. The door clicked shut behind me. I bent down to take off my shoes. I didn't put on those pink slippers, nor did I retrieve my own. I walked in my socks, my feet, touching the cold tiles. The chill traveling from the soles of my feet to my knees made me feel more awake. The living room lights were on. Draped casually over the sofa armrest was Arthur's navy suit jacket. Next to it, a pale pink silk scarf lay limply, as if dropped by accident. I looked at it for a moment, realizing the sweet perfume in the house emanated from it. It was not my scent. On the coffee table was a half-empty glass of expensive tonic. Next to it was a paper bag from Jojo Mom and Bebe. Inside, I could see baby bottles, muslin cloths, and some pale blue newborn mittens. A receipt had been hastily shoved into the placeless side. Bag, a corner sticking out. I pulled it out. Customer. Chloe. The last 4 digits of the phone number perfectly matched the work-only secondary phone. Arthur kept. Date of purchase. This morning. I put the receipt back. My hands weren't shaking as I thought they would be. Perhaps when a person has already been stabbed in the chest at the hospital, the minor cuts upon returning home serve only to confirm that the knife is real. In the kitchen, a pot of plain porridge was still on the induction hob. Next to it was a small plate of sliced ginger, a tub of brown sugar, and a few organic eggs in a basket. My mother-in-law used to say, "Women who have just given birth must eat carefully, drink carefully, and avoid drafts and the cold." When I had a fever of nearly 40 degrees last winter, she merely said, "It's just a standard cold. Take a paracetamol, get up, and cook dinner. A woman shouldn't be so fragile." The lid of the pot was still warm. She must have been here just before Arthur rushed her to the hospital. I walked past the living room, my steps very light. The apartment was over 70 square meters, 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking the street, and an open-plan kitchen and living area. When we first married, Arthur said he wanted to buy a place slightly outside central London for peace and quiet. The initial deposit came from savings my late mother had left me, plus a bonus from my company, Oakwell Holdings. But when doing the paperwork, Arthur suggested putting both our names on the deed to avoid being overly calculating. I had believed him. I believed him so much that even years later, as he gradually brought his work, his friends, and his secrets into this house, I still thought that as long as I was patient, everything would pass. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Inside, the bedsheets had been changed to 11 almondsy cream set that I disliked. On the dressing table sat a pearl hair clip, a style much younger than I would wear. The wardrobe door was half open. My clothes were still hanging on the left: blouses, work dresses, a few light cardigans, but they had been shoved tightly together, making way for a new empty space that smelled of mothballs and that strange perfume. The bottom drawer contained 3 pink plastic storage boxes. I crouched down in front of the wardrobe. My knees ached slightly, and my lower abdomen felt a dull thrum, causing me instinctively to place my hand over it. My baby had arrived. Exactly when this house had already made room for another woman about to give birth. The lid of the first box wasn't locked. A light pull would open it. But my fingers hovered over the plastic edge, ultimately deciding not to lift it. There, I was no need. Someone had brought their belongings right into my bedroom, placed their slippers on my shoe rack, cooked porridge in my kitchen. Whether those boxes contained clothes, cosmetics, or documents wouldn't change a thing. I stood up, walked to the end of the bed, and pulled out my suitcase. The gray suitcase sat in the corner, its wheels coated in a thin layer of dust. The last time I used it was for a trip to Cornwall 2 years ago, when Arthur still held my hand on the beach and promised that when we had a child, he would bring them here to see the sea. Recalling that promise now didn't cause a sharp pain. It just felt entirely alien, like a story about someone else. The zip of the suitcase got stuck on the curve. I tugged once, failed, bent, down, and pulled harder. The metallic zip screeched loudly in the bedroom. Nobody heard it. This house, where I was once terrified of dropping a bowl for, I fear of my mother-in-law calling me clumsy, was now perfectly silent as I packed away my very existence to leave it. I folded my clothes item by item. I chose simple things, enough for a few days. Coats, underwear, a work suit, my national insurance documents, personal ID. The bedside drawer held my passport, a copy of our marriage certificate, and a few bank cards. I took them all and put them in my handbag. I pulled the ultrasound scan from my coat pocket. I looked at it under the warm, yellow lamp of the bedroom. Pregnancy 6 weeks. Nestled among the medical jargon, the doctor had added a note. Follow-up scan in 2 weeks. Take folic acid. Avoid stress. I exhaled softly, folded the paper more carefully than I had at the hospital, and slipped it into a separate compartment in my bag. On the bedside table sat a framed wedding photo of Arthur and me. The silver frame was slightly tarnished. In the photo, I was wearing a white dress, smiling, so widely my eyes crinkled. Arthur stood beside me, his hand on my waist, looking mature and gentle. My mother-in-law once praised that photo because it made Arthur look like a successful man, and I looked like a woman who knew how to obey. I picked up the frame. The glass was cold against my palm. On my wedding day, in the bridal dressing room, my cousin Harriet had whispered to me, "Are you sure about this, Ellie? Arthur seems decent, but his mother is going to be difficult." I had laughed. "As long as Arthur loves me, it's fine." A response. So young, so foolish. I laid the photo frame face down on the table, as if closing the book on a face I no longer wished to see. The landline in the living room suddenly rang. The outdated sound felt desperately out of place in the quiet apartment, making my heart jolt slightly. Arthur rarely used the landline. Only his mother occasionally called it when she couldn't reach me on my mobile. I stood in the bedroom, letting it ring 7 times before it cut off. A moment later, my mobile lit up, mother-in-law. I watched the screen until the call timed out. Immediately after, a voice note arrived. "Eleanor, where are you wandering off to that? You're ignoring my calls. Arthur is busy at the hospital. Don't you start throwing a tantrum. The family is expecting joyous news. As a wife, you need to know your place." I didn't press replay. I just screenshotted it and saved it to a new folder on my phone titled Evidence Hoso. Those letters appearing on the screen made me pause. Perhaps from that exact moment, I no longer considered myself just a sulking wife. A sulking wife waits to be coaxed. I was gathering evidence, documents, and whatever scraps of self-respect I had left. I scrolled to Mrs. Higgins, our part-time cleaner, saved in my contacts. I called. It rang for a while before she picked up. Her voice was mixed with the sound of traffic. "Hello, Mrs. Eleanor. Do you need me to come over and do some extra cleaning?" "No, Mrs. Higgins." I looked around the room once, speaking slowly. "From tomorrow, you don't need to come to the flat anymore. I'll transfer your pay for this month in full, plus an extra 2 weeks' pay as a severance." Mrs. Higgins went silent for a few seconds. "Has something happened, ma'am?" "This afternoon, Miss Chloe." She stopped mid-sentence. I didn't ask how she knew. Chloe's name. The cleaners in a house are often the ones who see the clearest what the owners try to hide. They just don't have the right to speak. "It's fine." My voice was calmer than my own thoughts. "If Arthur or his mother asks you later, just tell them the truth. I called tonight to let you go. Don't add or subtract anything. Don't get caught up in our family mess." Mrs. Higgins sighed very softly. "Look after your health, Mrs. Eleanor. You've been looking terribly pale lately." That unexpected remark made my throat constrict. For years as a daughter-in-law, outsiders sometimes saw that I was exhausted, whilst my own family only ever saw that I wasn't good enough. "Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Higgins." I hung up, opened my banking app, and transferred the money immediately. The success notification popped up. A small task completed. My mind felt slightly less tangled. In Arthur's desk drawer were some company documents mixed with the flat's paperwork. I didn't touch his private files. For the documents belonging to the documents / and M size of Liasile. Kingsley Estates projects, I only photographed the covers and where they were kept, just in case a solicitor later needed to know they had been there. As for personal documents, the copy of the flat's deed, and the investment portfolios, with my name on them, I had secured copies long ago. Oliver, a colleague from Oakwell Holdings, had once advised me to keep my own physical and digital copies. Back then, I thought he was just being overly cautious. Tonight, that caution became my lifeboat. The wall clock struck 11. The second hand ticked evenly in the living room. I pulled my suitcase out, the wheels rattling over the tiles. I unhooked my keys from my bag, placed them on the shoe rack right next to the pink slippers, then took a post-it note from the drawer and wrote, very slowly, I am not taking anything belonging to your family. Do not touch what belongs to me. My handwriting didn't tremble. I looked at that sentence for a moment. It felt far too brief for nearly 4 years of marriage, yet perfectly sufficient for a departure that required no audience. The front door opened. A draft from the corridor blew in, making the edge of the blend post-it note curl slightly. I dragged the suitcase out, locked the door with my key card, and pushed the card under the door just before it clicked completely shut. Inside, all that remained were the pink slippers, an unfamiliar silk scarf, a face-down wedding photo, and the smell of porridge turning cold in the kitchen. The 16th floor corridor was deserted. The sensor lights flicked on as I walked, fading to black behind me. On the wall, my shadow stretched out next to my suitcase. As I passed the apartment opposite ours, I heard a TV playing a comedy show with loud, canned laughter. That laughter made tonight feel even more like a cruel joke. Down in the lobby, the concierge was still in his booth. Seeing me with a suitcase, he looked surprised and opened his glass partition. Going on a business trip, Mrs. Eleanor? Bit late for that. I paused for a few seconds. In the past, whenever I went anywhere, I was terrified of outsiders asking, terrified of having to explain, terrified of causing my in-laws to lose face. But when a marriage has been deliberately soiled by the insiders, the one still trying to save face becomes utterly laughable. Yes, I'll be away for a few days, I replied. He looked at the suitcase, then at my face. He probably wanted to ask more, but just nodded. Travel safe, ma'am. It's freezing out there. I will. Outside the apartment complex, the night wind was stronger. The trees rustled, and dry leaves rolled alongside the wheels of my suitcase. While waiting for an Uber, my phone lit up continuously. 2 missed calls from Arthur, likely from the hospital. His text squeezed in between the notifications. Are you home yet? I have a crisis to sort out. Don't listen to any gossip. Ellie, why aren't you answering? I read each line. The strangest feeling wasn't pain, but the realization that this man still believed he had the right to tell me not to listen to gossip. When my own eyes had witnessed everything, a silver Toyota Prius pulled up. The driver rolled down the window and confirmed my name. I nodded and hoisted my suitcase into the boot myself. The driver offered to help, but I shook my head. It's fine, I've got it. As soon as I said it, my nose stung. Not because the suitcase was heavy, but because for so many years, I had forgotten how many things I was perfectly capable of doing. Myself. The car pulled away. Through the window, the Belvedere apartments faded into the apartments. Distance. Each lit window was like a tiny box containing someone else's life. Perhaps in a little while, Arthur would come home. Perhaps he would see the keys, the note, the half-empty wardrobe, and start calling me frantically. Perhaps he would be angry before he was afraid. Because a man like Arthur was used to having everything comfortably within his grasp. My coat pocket bulged with the ultrasound scan. I slipped my hand in to hold it. My lower abdomen was still twinging, not a sharp pain, just a gentle reminder that tonight I wasn't alone. Alongside the wreckage of my life, there was a Potizen the Palbertes, tiny life, knowing nothing, quietly placing its entire trust in me. As the car turned onto the main road, the phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Arthur. The screen displayed the name, mother-in-law. I stared at it until the ringing stopped. In the cabin, the driver had the radio on low, a presenter reading the traffic update in a monotone voice. My finger slid to the played power off button. Absolute silence. I placed the phone face down on my lap and looked out the window. London was freezing that night, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt I was finally heading in the right direction. The hotel I chose was tucked away in a quiet street near Hyde Park, its blue sign faded by the rain and sun. The room had a double bed, a cheap veneer, wardrobe, a small table, and a bedside lamp with a flickering, sickly yellow glow. I placed my suitcase by the bed, took off my coat, hung it up, and sat on the edge of the mattress. My entire body felt as though it had just walked through a relentless gale. Only upon stopping did I feel the ache in my knees and the stiffness in my shoulders. I opened my bag and took out the ultrasound printout. The edges were slightly crumpled from being shoved in my pocket for so long. I smoothed it out on the Brachen's desk, pressing the creases flat with my palm. The scan showed nothing but a tiny speck, so small that if the doctor hadn't circled it, I probably wouldn't have known my baby was there. A life the size of a bean, yet it forced me to sit up straight in this strange room, not daring to cry out loud, not daring to let myself collapse. First night away from home, I thought I wouldn't sleep a wink, yet I did. I woke up near dawn because my stomach was slightly churning. My hand automatically rested on my lower belly, very gently. "It's okay," I whispered, not knowing if I was talking to the baby or to myself. "Mummy is still here." The following 3 days passed like a vacuum between two noisy shores. In the closed mornings, I walked down to the corner cafe for some porridge or an egg and cress sandwich. The cafe owner remembered my face quickly, always asking, "No onions? Right, love?" I nodded, paid, and took my food back to the room. In the afternoons, when it was less bitterly cold, I walked around Hyde Park. Elderly, people walking dogs, children on tricycles, vendors huddled by their stalls. Life hummed along steadily, entirely unconcerned that a woman had just left her house keys on a shoe rack. On the 4th day, I turned my phone back on. Within 10 seconds, it vibrated violently. Missed calls from Arthur, from Margaret, a few unknown numbers, and dozens of texts. I left the phone on the desk, watching it tremble like a starved animal. Arthur's text came first. "Where are you? Stop acting like a child and come home. I told you I will explain what happened at the hospital." Then a longer message sent at 2 a.m. "Ellie, my mother is furious. Don't make this ugly. Chloe has just given birth. Her health is fragile. Whatever it is, we can talk calmly." I stopped reading it. Chloe has just given birth. Outside the window, it was raining. Drops battered the glass in long streaks, distorting the street lamps. Inside the small room, my ultrasound scan lay beneath a notebook, silent as if it didn't exist. A voice note from Margaret was next. I clicked play. Her sharp, vibrating voice echoed the same voice she used whenever she wanted to force my head down. "Eleanor, haven't you wandered enough? This family doesn't have time for your tantrums. Arthur is busy looking after someone who's just had a baby. As a wife, you should know your place. If you can't help, at least don't cause more chaos." At noon, Harriet called. Her name flashing on the screen made me hesitate before answering. She is my older cousin, 6 years my senior. Blunt but fiercely protective. On my wedding day, she had pulled me aside. "Live decently, Ellie, but never let them walk all over you." I had laughed it off then. Looking back, I realized I had been trampling over her advice for nearly 4 years. Through the line, I heard wind and traffic. Harriet spoke rapidly. "Ellie, where? Are you safe?" "I'm fine." I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back slightly. "You know what happened?" "I know half of it, and I'm already choking with rage." Her voice dropped. She was likely looking for a quieter spot. "Today, Arthur's family is having a celebratory lunch for the baby boy at Aunt Margaret's house, but the things she was saying about you in front of everyone were vile." The glass of water in my hand tapped lightly against the windowsill. "What did she say?" Harriet paused. That silence told me the answer wouldn't be easy to hear. She said their family is blessed to finally have a grandson, seeing as the daughter-in-law they've had for years has a barren womb. Then a few of Arthur's aunts chimed in, saying women who can't bear children should know their place and step aside for someone who can. The rain against the window intensified. A car drove through a puddle outside, splashing loudly. I watched the water trace down the glass. My throat felt instantly dry. Harriet continued, suppressing her anger. "I wasn't there. Aunt Susan sent photos to the family WhatsApp group. That's how I found out. There are photos of Chloe, sitting in Arthur's living room. Margaret standing next to her, grinning like she'd struck gold. It makes my skin crawl. My phone buzzed. Harriet had forwarded the photos on WhatsApp. I opened them. Margaret's living room in Chelsea was brightly lit. The dining table was laden with food roast beef, Yorkshire puddings, a massive spread. Chloe sat in the blank/'s palm, middle of the sofa, wrapped in a thin shawl, her hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck. In her arms was a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Arthur sat, slightly apart, not smiling outright, but his eyes were fixed on the baby. Margaret stood behind Chloe, a hand on her shoulder, radiant. Another photo, a close-up. On the coffee table was a Victoria sponge cake. Piped. In chocolate icing were the words, "Welcome to the Kingsley family grandson." I zoomed in. On the right side of the frame, draped over Chloe's shoulders, was the pale pink silk scarf that had been lying on my sofa. The same scarf. The same perfume. Everything in my life, without needing a confession, spoke for itself. "Ellie, are you still there?" Harriet called. "Yes," I replied. "Don't read the family group chat if they add you. They're venomous. Honestly, don't go back right now. If you need anything, I'll come to you." I pulled out the chair and sat down, placing the water glass on the table. I don't want anyone to know where I am. Silence on the other end. I knew Harriet was hurt by that, but it had to be said. The fewer people who knew, the safer I felt. Not because I feared Arthur finding me, but because I wasn't ready for anyone to pull me back into the cycle of arguments. A woman 6 weeks pregnant shouldn't have to stand in the middle of her in-laws' living room just to prove she knows how to bleed. Harriet exhaled heavily. "All right, just make sure you're eating properly. Do you need money? I'll transfer some." "I have enough." I looked at the suitcase by the wall. I brought my documents as Crane. And cards. "Ellie." Her voice softened. "You're hiding something from me, aren't you?" My hand rested over my stomach. Beneath my thin jumper was a tiny, quiet space, smaller even than the wave of self-pity spreading through my chest. "I am, but I'll tell you when I'm ready." Harriet didn't push. "All right. As long as you're looking after yourself. Don't forget, just because that family is rubbish doesn't mean you don't have people who care about you." After hanging up, I sat at the table for a long time. The rain lashed against the glass. The hotel room was darker than the morning. The wall-mounted TV was showing an old film on mute. A character on screen was crying silently. I watched them and suddenly found it funny. Without sound, even the most tragic scenes just look bizarre and exaggerated. The phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number texted me. "Mrs. Eleanor, it's Mrs. Higgins. I don't know if I should text you, but today, Mrs. Margaret said if you don't come back soon, all your things in the flat will be given to Miss Chloe to use. She also said if you can't have a baby, you should know when to quit." It made me so angry I had to tell you. "Please take care of yourself." I read the text twice. Mrs. Higgins must have debated heavily before sending it. A hired cleaner knew what crossed the line, yet the woman who once called me her daughter-in-law did not. I texted back, "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. Please don't get involved. If anyone asks, just say you don't know." Another screenshot went into the evidence folder. In the late afternoon, the rain eased. I put on my coat and went downstairs to buy some soup and fruit. The cafe owner looked at me and asked quietly, "Just getting over a bug, love? You look awfully pale." "Just a bit tired, thank you." She ladled an extra scoop of soup into my bowl without charging me. "Eat up. While it's hot, keep your stomach warm." That ordinary kindness from a stranger made my eyes sting. I bowed my head, paid, and carried the bag back to the hotel. The old lift rattled slowly upward, smelling of floor cleaner and stale cigarette smoke. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, my phone pinged with a new message. "Arthur, are you at Harriet's? I'm coming to pick you up. Ellie, I know you're angry, but this situation isn't what you think." I stood in the corridor staring at the words, "isn't what you think," for a moment. In the hospital, he called another woman his wife. At home, another. Woman's slippers were exactly where mine should be. In his mother's living room, another woman held a baby hailed as the Kingsley family grandson. If all of that isn't what I think, then what he truly wanted was for me to simply stop thinking altogether. I opened the chat, typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, deleted. Ultimately, I sent nothing. Silence isn't always a sign of weakness. Sometimes you just don't want to hand the other person any more words they can twist. That evening, after finishing my soup, I opened my laptop. It was old, a few keys shiny from use. My personal inbox was full of unread work emails. I ignored them and searched for Oliver's address. Oliver was a legal assistant at Oakwell Holdings, someone who had frequently sent me files to sign when Oakwell partnered with Kingsley Estates. We weren't close, but he was meticulous. Whenever I queried a contract, he explained it clearly, unlike Arthur, who would just laugh it off. The subject line blinked in the white box. Review of guarantor documents and joint control transactions with Kingsley Estates. I rested my hands on the keyboard. Outside, the rain had started again. Lighter, but persistent. Next to the laptop, my ultrasound scan was tucked safely into my carding notebook. I looked at it for a second, then began to type. Hi, Oliver. I need to urgently review all guarantor documents and related contracts between Oakwell Holdings and Kingsley Estates, specifically the accounts requiring my joint control signature. Please arrange this for me as soon as possible. My finger paused at the end of the sentence. I read it over, changing would like to need to, then hit send. The screen confirmed the email was dispatched. Another task done. Out there, the Kingsley family might be raising a toast to a grandson. Arthur might be assuming I was just hiding somewhere waiting for him to find me. Margaret might still be telling relatives I was barren, unreasonable, and unworthy. But me, in this 20-square-meter hotel room for the first time in 3 years, I was reopening the part of my life I had personally locked away. The next morning, Oliver replied at 7:12 a.m. Received. Pick a discrete location, I'll bring copies of the files. I had noticed anomalies in some disbursements before, but since you hadn't requested an audit, I couldn't intervene. I read that last sentence over and over, noticed anomalies in some disbursements. Before. It hadn't started with the pink slippers, nor the hospital corridor. There were cracks already deep in the walls. I had just been too busy scrubbing the floors, cooking dinner, and comforting myself with the lie that every family struggles, refusing to look up and see the damage. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe tucked away in an alley near Marylebone. The cafe had an upstairs seating area by the window, usually empty during the day. I arrived 10 minutes early and ordered an orange juice, no ice. The waiter asked if I wanted a coffee. I shook my head. Since finding out I was pregnant, every small choice had automatically become cautious. On the table, I laid out my notebook, pen, laptop, and fully charged phone. My handbag sat on the chair. Beside me, the ultrasound scan and personal IDs secured in a separate compartment. I wore nothing flashy, just a gray thin knit jumper and black trousers. In the small mirror by the stairs, my face was pale, but my eyes were no longer swollen. Oliver arrived precisely on time. He wore a pale blue shirt, holding a thick, brown folder. Seeing me, he faltered slightly. He must have noticed how different I looked compared to the times I signed papers at the Oakwell office, where I always maintained the facade of a leisurely wife who didn't care much for business affairs. Are you all right? Oliver asked after sitting down. I smiled very faintly. If I were, I wouldn't have called you out here. He paused. The waiter brought over my orange juice and a black coffee for Oliver. Once the girl left, he opened the folder, pulling out stacks of color-coded documents. I'll tell you straight away so you can brace yourself, Oliver said, keeping his voice low. The relationship between Oakwell Holdings and Kingsley Estates isn't just a few standard contracts. Over the past 3 years, Kingsley Estates has used Oakwell's credibility to secure guarantees or joint ventures for at least 4 projects. There are 2 operational accounts requiring your BACS joint control signature, but the actual day-to-day operations have been almost entirely handled by Arthur's side. I looked at the first stack. The cover page read the Ashford Project, supply of equipment and outpatient clinic refurbishment. My signature was at the bottom of the page next to Arthur's. The familiar handwriting was blinding. The date was over 2 years ago. I remembered that evening. I had brought the file home and put it on the dining table while clearing plates. Arthur said it was just a formality to put my mind at ease, because the guarantee involved my family's capital. Margaret sitting nearby watching TV, had chimed in with a laugh. What? Do women know about corporate paperwork? If your husband tells you to sign, just sign. The money he makes is for this house anyway. I had washed my hands, dried every finger, and signed. It turns out some signatures make no noise but can later become nooses around your neck. Oliver pushed a reconciliation sheet forward. This is the cash flow for the port's Ashford project. Per the contract, the advance payment was supposed to be used for medical equipment, supplies, refurbishment, and labor. But Kingsley Estates diverted a portion to 3 construction material suppliers not on the initial approved list, at prices 20 to 35% above market rate. Who do those 3 suppliers belong to? I asked. I haven't drawn a definitive conclusion yet, but one of the companies has an official representative who is Margaret's cousin. My orange juice remained untouched. A piece of pulp floated on the surface, slowly spinning from when the waiter had stirred it. I watched it, realizing the feeling in my chest was no longer the pain of romantic betrayal, but a chilling realization of how naive I had been about things I should have been sharp about. Does Arthur know? I asked. Oliver looked at me. As the director of Kingsley Estates, it's impossible for 12 him not to know. The answer was concise, devoid of pity or comfort, because it was the truth. I opened my notebook and wrote down the bullet points. Ashford project. 3. Suppliers, inflated prices, joint control accounts, Oakwell guarantee. My Gapsilas NMRA. Handwriting was shaky at first, then steadied. Oliver moved to the second stack. The Greenwich development shows similar signs, plus there are several dodgy invoices for consultancy services. If an independent auditor comes in, it is highly likely they will demand an explanation. So, if I demand an immediate suspension of all transactions requiring my signature, that is entirely within your rights, Oliver replied instantly. As long as you notify them in writing, cite risk assessment as the reason, and ensure you do not arbitrarily appropriate or transfer any funds yourself. You are merely requesting the bank to halt disbursements for joint consent funds whilst revoking or reviewing unexecuted guarantees. The contracts allow this. The phrase "within your rights" made me exhale slowly. Last night, when emailing Oliver, a small part of me feared I was acting out of vengeance, feared I would look back one day and see I had gone too far out of hurt. But the numbers on these pages didn't feel jealousy or pain. They didn't take sides. They lay there, coldly proving that Arthur had not only brought another woman into our home, but had also placed my blind trust under immense risk without bothering to explain. I don't want to touch his personal accounts, I said, and I don't want to do anything illegal. What belongs to him, he can keep. But anything involving me and Oakwell Holdings stops today. Separate it all. Oliver nodded. I understand. I've prepared 3 draft letters, one to the bank, one to Kingsley Estates, and one to an independent auditor. Read them carefully before you decide to sign. He laid 3 printed sheets neatly in front of me, black and white. No tears, no screaming, no pink slippers. But looking at the words "immediate suspension" of joint control transactions and request for audit of capital expenditure, I goaded Ifedie Chadie. Knew this was the real door out of that marriage. Packing a suitcase isn't the end. Sometimes, a woman trying to escape the place that swallowed her must go back and retrieve every signature, every account, every document she ever undervalued. Oliver let me read in silence. Downstairs, the coffee grinder whirred. Outside the window, a delivery driver parked his moped under a tree, quickly eating a sandwich while scrolling on his phone. The world outside carried on as normal. Meanwhile, on our table lay the documents that would finally make Arthur realize my disappearance wasn't a petty tantrum. At the 3rd document, my eyes stopped at my full printed name, Eleanor Grace Turner. It had been a long time since I saw that name on a formal document. At my in-laws, I was just Ellie, Arthur's wife, Margaret's daughter-in-law, the woman who couldn't get pregnant. My full name only appeared when signing papers, before Arthur quickly flipped to the next page. Even I had forgotten that behind. The soft, accommodating Ellie was a person who had the right to sign, the place, right to question, and the right to refuse. I'll sign the bank notification first, I said. Oliver handed me his pen. Are you sure? I'm sure. The pen met the paper. a long, familiar flourish. My hand didn't shake. After signing the first, I read the second. The letter to Kingsley Estates was fiercely formal, demanding expenditure justifications, halting unaccounted disbursements, and demanding full cooperation with auditors per the contract. Not a single mention of Chloe. Not a single mention of Arthur calling another woman his wife. But the absence of those things was precisely what gave the Brady's a document its crushing weight. I signed the third, the audit request. Oliver then slid a thin, unmarked envelope toward me. I prepared this just in case you need it. You don't have to. File it immediately. I opened it. Inside was a draft divorce petition. My eyes landed on the petitioner line. My full name was there, clear and bold. Arthur's name sat below. 4 years of marriage reduced to a few pages with cold check boxes. Joint. Assets, joint liabilities, children of the marriage. When I saw the word children, my hand darted to my stomach so fast I was terrified Oliver noticed. He didn't ask, but his gaze lingered for a fraction to a second. Good legal professionals know when to remain silent about the parts of a client's life they aren't ready to share. I'll keep this one for now, I said, folding the petition. I won't file it. Just yet. Oliver nodded. When you decide, I'll help. But I need to ask you straight, does Arthur know you're pulling these files? Not yet, but once the bank gets this, he'll know very quickly. He might try to find me to pressure me or claim I'm doing this out of personal spite. I looked down at my orange juice, now entirely room temperature. He will definitely say that Arthur is an expert at turning his own mistakes into someone else's overreaction. Do you have a safe place to stay? Yes. Does your family know? Harriet knows I've left the house, but she doesn't know where I am. Oliver was quiet for a few seconds before saying, good. From now on, any financial communication with Arthur should be in writing or with a witness. Save. Any threatening or abusive texts. Do not get into verbal arguments. I gave a hollow laugh. I've gotten quite used to doing that these past few days. The moment I said it, the atmosphere thickened. Oliver didn't ask what I had endured. Sometimes in this world, just seeing how someone guards their phone or how casually they talk about saving evidence is enough to understand the bruises they carry. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. Before we left, Oliver handed me an envelope of copies and a USB stick. Scans are on here. Keep them safe. I'll send the official letters today via our corporate channels. If the bank acts quickly, the joint accounts will be frozen by this afternoon or tomorrow morning. I took the USB. The small metal casing felt colder in my palm than I expected. Stepping out of the cafe, the sun had broken through the clouds. The pavement was wet, the smell of damp earth mixing with roasting coffee. Oliver asked if I should call a cab. I shook my head. I want to walk for a bit. Don't walk for too long. He looked at me, his tone gentler than usual. You don't look well. I know. Walking down the narrow street, people were hanging rugs out to dry. A street food vendor was serving hot portions to customers, the steam carrying the scent of fried onions. I walked slowly, clutching the folder to my chest like something fragile. Not because the files were delicate, but because the truth they were about to expose would mean many people could no longer pretend. My phone vibrated. Arthur calling. I stared at his name and didn't answer. The call dropped, then rang again. On the third attempt, I switched it to silent. Before, every call from him would make me oscillate between anger and anticipation. Now, it just sounded like someone knocking on a door I had already deadbolted. Back at the hotel, I locked the USB in my suitcase, put the folder in the desk drawer, and used my notebook to log the day's timeline. What I ate? What? Medication I took, which letter was sent, which calls I received. Those brief lines kept me from drowning in chaos. At 3 p.m., Oliver texted, "Letters dispatched. The bank has confirmed receipt of the freeze request pending review." I put my phone down. The hotel room was silent. Late afternoon, sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting a long golden stripe on the faux wood floor. From the next room, I could hear a toddler giggling, then a mother coaxing, "Put your slippers on, your feet will get cold." I looked down at my own feet. My white socks were worn at the heels but clean. Suddenly, I remembered the pink slippers on my shoe rack. I remembered them. Vividly, but I no longer felt the urge to rush back and throw them out. A pair of slippers can only take your place if you still believe you have to yield it. I was done yielding. That afternoon, elsewhere in London, Arthur probably still didn't know he was Teller, about to receive the first phone call. But I could picture the Kingsley Estates office. Thomas, his deputy, would hold the phone, his voice more frantic than usual. Arthur might be sitting at his desk, a half-finished coffee beside him, staring at the Ashford project timeline on his screen. He would frown at the PLOS word bank, then lose his temper when he heard frozen accounts. And just like that, nearing 5 p.m., Oliver sent me a short text. Kingsley Estates. Got the notice. Thomas called to verify. He said he's going to inform Arthur directly. I set the phone down and opened the window to let the breeze in. The city at 1:80 breeze. Twilight was loud horns, people shouting, rubbish trucks rumbling. These sounds clashed into a very real existence. A place where every mistake eventually demands someone to stand up and explain it. On the morning of the 6th day since I left home, Arthur sent a very short text. "What on earth are you doing?" The message popped up just as I finished my egg sandwich. The hotel experienced a 10-minute power cut. The heater died, and the room grew stuffy, the smell of cheap detergent from the bedsheets mingling with the damp rain on the curtains. I sat by the small table, a half-drunk glass of warm milk in front of me, my phone next to my medication diary. I looked at the text and didn't reply. A moment later, Arthur called. The first call rang out entirely. The second was shorter. The third cut off abruptly, as if the caller suddenly remembered that throwing a tantrum is a waste of energy when there is no audience on the other. And the next text arrived immediately. The bank says you've requested to freeze the bank bang. Ashford disbursements. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're causing? I placed the phone face down. The bread in my mouth suddenly tasted like cardboard. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to swallow. The doctor had warned me not to skip meals, especially during the early weeks of pregnancy when energy drops rapidly. In the past, a simple frown from Arthur was enough for me to abandon my dinner to explain myself. Now, the most important task of the morning was finishing the food on my plate. The phone vibrated again. This time it was Oliver. "Can you talk?" he asked. I could hear the rustle of papers and muffled voices in the background on his end. "Yes." Kingsley Estates responded quite aggressively. "Arthur assumes you're using a family dispute to pressure the company." I replied formally, reiterating that the freeze is based purely on the guarantee clauses and evidence of anomalous permosters. Invoicing. Did he ask where I am? Yes, but I refused to answer. Thomas from Kingsley just called me privately. He sounded very stressed. It seems they are entangled in more than just one project. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back. Down on the street, an SDHA elderly woman in a rain hat was arranging bruised bananas at a fruit stall. The city looked exactly the same from the 4th floor, while behind the glass windows of corporate offices, people were likely scrambling to plug a sinking ship. "I don't want to drag innocent people into this," I said. Oliver paused for a second, then replied, "Innocent people will be protected by clear records. Only the guilty fear an audit." That sentence stayed in my head for a long time. That afternoon, Mrs. Higgins texted. Her messages were brief, every word carefully weighed. "Mrs. Eleanor, Mr. Arthur came home today. He asked if I knew where you went. I told him exactly what you said, that you let me go and I don't know where you are." He looked utterly panicked. I stared at the word panicked before typing back. "Did he give you any trouble?" "No, he just asked a lot of questions." When he saw the empty house, his face turned ash gray. Mrs. Higgins then sent a voice note. I plugged in my earphones and listened. Her voice was faint, drowned out slightly by a passing bus. "Mrs. Eleanor, I don't want to pry, but it broke my heart a bit. He unlocked the door, initially looking furious, shouting your name. But when he went into the bedroom, saw the half-empty wardrobe, the wedding photo face down, and the keys on the shoe rack, he stood completely still for ages. I watched from the door. He was holding the note you left, and his hands were shaking. I took out my earphones and placed them on the table. The note only had 2 sentences, written with total calm. No complaints, no blame, no questions. Perhaps that was precisely why it made him tremble. People prepare themselves for tears, screaming, and desperate pleading, but faced with a clean, silent exit, they suddenly realize they have no one to argue with. Mrs. Higgins texted again. He asked me if you had been crying. I told him I didn't know, but that when you called me, your voice sounded perfectly normal. A faint smile touched my lips, so it took him until now to wonder if I had cried. That night, my phone was flooded with texts from Arthur. Come home. Let's talk. Face to face. Don't drag the company into our private matters. Ellie, I never said I was going to leave you. I stared at the last line a bit longer. I never said I was going to leave you. That was true. Arthur never said it. He just let another woman wear slippers in my house, carried her into a hospital claiming she was his wife, and sat beside her during a celebratory dinner for the Kingsley family's grandson. Some people never utter the word breakup because they want to keep both the old chair and the new one. At 10 p.m., Harriet FaceTimed me. I declined the video and switched to a voice call. She didn't question it. It's absolute chaos at Arthur's family house, she said. Aunt Susan just sent photos to the group. Margaret has deleted all the grandson celebration pictures. Why delete them? Apparently, someone from Arthur's company took screenshots and spread them around. And rumors about the company's accounts being frozen have reached the Wenny-Baxen's extended family. Margaret is now changing her tune, telling everyone you did something reckless because you were jealous. I pulled the blanket over my knees. The hotel was chilly at night, especially after the rain. Don't argue with them, Harriet. I know, but I'm furious. I was furious once too, I said softly. Now I just don't want to waste the energy. The line went quiet. Harriet sighed. You've changed. How? I looked at my hands. My fingers were still thin, nails clipped short. The tiny scratch on my knuckle from hauling the suitcase hadn't fully healed. I didn't feel changed. I just felt like an old layer of skin was peeling away. Beneath it might be raw and sensitive, but at least it was mine. The next day, Oliver sent me an update. Thomas sent me an internal email that he got leaked. He says someone sent an anonymous email to the entire executive board of Kingsley Estates. Oliver opened his laptop screen share. I watched the cooling fan hum quietly. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. Supplier invoices, payment amounts, approval, dates, approvers. The final column showed Arthur's digital signature, with red annotations on several rows. Steel prices 32% above market. Equipment paid for, but not delivered. Supplier registered to relative's address. The room felt incredibly silent. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Thomas sent it to me because he's terrified of going down with the ship, Oliver said. He said this file was just sent to Arthur too. I looked at Arthur's signature, that sweeping, confident stroke. I had seen it. Hundreds of times on mortgage papers, flat deeds, client greeting cards. I used to think a man who signed with such force was someone who could shoulder responsibilities. Later, I realized some people sign forcefully because they believe there will always be someone else to clean up the mess. Arthur will think I sent it, I said. Possibly. Oliver closed the laptop. But the sender doesn't matter as much as whether the contents are true. From now on, this is no longer just a marital dispute. That sentence dropped between us like a final full stop on my last lingering illusion. I left the solicitor's office just as the rain stopped. On my way back, Arthur called 11 times. The texts were frantic. Where are you? Did you send that? Anonymous email? Ellie, are you trying to destroy my company? Everything I did was for this family. That last line made me stop dead on the pavement. A girl walking behind me nearly bumped into my back, apologized, and hurried on. I stood under the awning of a Boots pharmacy, staring at the words, for this family. The family he brought another woman into. The family his mother used to host a prand party for a child that wasn't mine. The family where, while I was 6 weeks, pregnant and hiding in a cheap hotel, he demanded I continue signing off on shady financial transfers. My finger hovered over the keyboard. This time, I typed one sentence and hit send. Anything regarding legal matters, communicate in writing. A single line. No blame, no explanations. The screen showed read, but Arthur. I didn't reply for a long time. I put my phone away and walked into the pharmacy. to buy more folic acid. When paying, I looked into the small security mirror. The woman looking back had slightly red eyes, but her posture was perfectly acceptably straight. That evening, Oliver forwarded another email. The sender was Thomas. It was just a few lines. Arthur received the spreadsheet. He demanded it trace the sender, but the whole board knows there's an emergency meeting tomorrow. Attached was a screenshot of the leaked email, showing Arthur's signature circled in red. I closed my laptop. Outside, street lamps cast halos on the wet tarmac. The hotel room was still cramped, the bed still unfamiliar. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I had been chased out of my own home. The next morning, the first text wasn't from Arthur. Oliver forwarded a message from Thomas. Kingsley Estates is holding an emergency board meeting. Our partner Greenwich has paused project sign-offs. The bank demands supplementary documents. Arthur exploded at the entire room. I read the text while sitting in the hospital waiting room. Street Jude's was bustling as usual, the tannoy blending with crying babies and shuffling feet. Opposite me, a husband was clumsily peeling the foil off a yogurt pot for his wife, spilling a bit on his hand. She laughed and scolded him softly. I told you to be careful. I watched them for a moment, then looked down at my maternity notes. My number was 6 away. In my bag, my phone buzzed incessantly, but it was on silent. Today, I needed to hear the doctor more than I needed to hear the panic of a man facing his own consequences. The doctor's exam was quick. The ultrasound screen showed a tiny speck, smaller than a fingernail. The doctor pointed out the gestational sac, told me to rest, eat well, avoid stress, and return in 2 weeks to hear the heartbeat properly. Is your partner with you today? She asked, writing in my notes. I shook my head. No, just me. She glanced up for a second. The gaze of a maternity doctor can be profound. They see every kind of pregnant woman walk through those doors. The cherished ones, the abandoned ones, the overjoyed, the terrified. Well, you need to be extra careful then. Any sharp pains or bleeding, head straight to A and E. Don't try to tough it out. I nodded and took my notes. As I walked out, a text from Oliver arrived. Are you done at the clinic? Massive twist on this end. You might want to sit down before reading this. I found a quiet corner at the end of the corridor, near a vending machine and some dusty fake plants. After buying a bottle of water, I opened my phone. Oliver had sent a screenshot of another message from Thomas. Oliver, I can't talk on the phone. Arthur is looking for Chloe. Word is, she used to brag about having family in the materials sector who could loan them short-term capital. Arthur just called her to beg for a bailout, and they had a massive screaming match. It doesn't look good. I read it and felt zero surprise. From the moment I realized Chloe had casually left her slippers in my flat, I knew she didn't just want love. A pregnant woman who is genuinely loved and secure doesn't need to sneak her slippers onto the legal wife's shoe rack. She needed status, power, and everything that came with it. At noon, I bought a jacket potato from a nearby cafe and took it back to the hotel. It was slightly dry, the filling too salty, but I ate almost all of it. While I was washing my hands, my phone lit up constantly. It wasn't Arthur. Perhaps he had finally realized I was no longer an easy lifeline to grab. At 3 p.m., Oliver called. I just got the full story from Thomas. Arthur went to his mother's house in Chelsea, where Chloe has been staying. He went to ask her to call her contacts for money, but the whole thing blew up. I sat on the edge of the bed. The curtains were open, the afternoon sun casting a pale yellow slash across the floor. Bleva pow. Oliver hesitated. The baby isn't Arthur's. I said nothing. In the hotel corridor, someone dragged a suitcase past, the wheels clattering. It sounded exactly like the night I left, only this time I wasn't standing in the freezing wind. I was sitting in a room, a hand over my stomach, listening to a sentence heavy enough to crush the Kingsley family in. Broad daylight. A DNA test? I asked. Yes. Chloe produced it. Seemed she had it ready, or at least proof of paternity, pointing to someone else. Thomas wasn't in the room, but he heard Arthur on the tapelings regrave. Phone afterward, completely losing control. A short silence fell between us. I remembered the photo of the celebratory dinner, Margaret's hand on Chloe's shoulder, beaming. The cake that said, "Welcome to the Kingsley family grandson." I remembered the words, "Women who Can't bear children should know their place. Being dumped on me like mud. Life isn't always this swiftly fair, but there are moments when the truth doesn't need a push. It rolls down the hill all on its own. Ellie, Oliver called softly. Are you all right? I'm all right. I looked at the patch of sunlight, feeling a sudden urge to laugh. Not a triumphant laugh, but a bitter one, the kind that escapes when your chest feels overwhelmingly heavy. The Kingsley family had used a child who didn't share a drop of their blood to humiliate me. Meanwhile, the child who actually carried Arthur's blood, if I ever chose to reveal it, was lying quietly inside me, unacknowledged and unasked. I didn't tell Oliver about the pregnancy. Not yet. Late that afternoon, Harriet called. She didn't beat around the bush. Have you heard about the baby? Yes. The whole neighborhood in Chelsea probably knows by now. Aunt Susan said it was an absolute war zone over there. Chloe packed her bags and tried to leave. With the baby. Margaret lunged at her, screaming the place down. Arthur just stood there like a zombie. Harriet's voice sounded vindicated, but she was trying to hold it back. Honestly, I don't want to laugh at a child's expense. The baby is innocent, but the way they crushed you just to elevate that child. Hearing this makes me sick. I think the baby is innocent too, I replied softly. Yeah. Harriet's voice softened. It's the adults who are guilty, using it as an excuse to do filthy things. That sentence stayed with me long after I hung up. That evening, Thomas sent Oliver a more detailed account, likely trying to secure his own legal standing away from Arthur. Oliver asked if I wanted to read it. I said yes. It wasn't poetic, just bullet points. But reading it painted a vivid picture of Margaret's living room. Arthur had arrived in a crumpled shirt, frantically calling someone. Margaret was holding the baby, rocking it while scolding the nanny for making the formula too thin. Chloe sat on the sofa, hair tied up, nails painted bright red, not looking at all like an exhausted postpartum mother. Arthur had asked Chloe, "You said your family has contacts in materials who can provide short-term capital. I need you to call them. My company needs it." Chloe had sneered. "I said that when you had money. Did you actually believe it?" Thomas relayed this via Arthur's rant later, but I could perfectly imagine her voice lazy, mocking, the tone of someone who already had her exit planned. Arthur hadn't believed it at first. He thought she was just moody post-birth. But Chloe was blunt. "I'm just a normal girl. My parents aren't big shots. I don't have an uncle in banking. I just said those things to make you happy." You loved hearing it. Margaret had put the baby down and shrieked, "How dare you speak like that? We've waited on you hand and foot since you got pregnant. Who do you think you Ari?" Chloe replied. "Were you waiting on me? Or your precious grandson?" She was the one who diverted the explosion. Arthur asked, "What do you mean?" According to Thomas, Chloe pulled a crumpled envelope from her handbag. Inside was a private DNA test result. She tossed it onto the coffee table like an expired receipt. I stopped reading there and stood up to pour a glass of water. The rim of the hotel glass was slightly chipped. I turned the chip outward so it wouldn't touch my lips. A small action, but it grounded me. The text continued. The document explicitly ruled out a biological relationship between Arthur and the baby. As for the real father, Chloe didn't name him, only referring to an older man, a Mr. Sterling, whom she had been seeing before she latched onto Arthur. Arthur immediately called Mr. Sterling, but it rang out. The second time, he was blocked. The baby shrieked in the living room, ignored by everyone. Margaret snatched the paper. She didn't understand the jargon, but she understood the words 0% probability. She asked if it was a fake. Chloe laughed. "Why would I fake it? If Arthur still had money, I wouldn't have said a word. But his company is about to go under. Your credit cards are probably going to start bouncing. Why would I sit around here with my baby?" Whether Arthur slapped her or not, Thomas didn't know. He only knew that on the phone afterward, Arthur was breathing heavily, his voice broken. "You lied to me?" Chloe's response was something that made me put my phone down. "You lied to yourself. Your wife took one look at me and knew I wasn't decent. Only your family thought that just because I was pushing out a boy, I was made of gold." The hotel room was so quiet, my breathing sounded amplified. I wasn't thrilled to be called smart by someone like Chloe. It didn't make me feel avenged. It just stripped everything bare. In the eyes of an outsider, my endurance at the Pradas. Kingsley House was clearly unappreciated, yet I was the only one trying to find reasons to stay every single day. The final text from Thomas mentioned Margaret lunging to grab the baby, then letting go, realizing she had no right to it anymore. Chloe took the baby, grabbed her bags, and said she would find Mr. Sterling herself. Before walking out, she told Arthur to focus on saving his company and not to come after her. For money, as she was broke too. After the door slammed, Margaret collapsed onto the sofa. The pastel blue baby clothes lay scattered. Margaret fainted, and Arthur called an ambulance. I stopped reading. On my screen, Oliver sent one last message. Thomas says, Arthur is in the hospital with his mother, but tomorrow morning's emergency board meeting with the bank and partners is still on. Oakwell Holdings is officially invited. Oakwell Holdings. Those two words made me look at the folder on the table. The draft divorce petition was still inside, alongside the audit requests, the frozen account notices, and the USB backup. Everything was neat, cold, but necessary. Suddenly, my phone lit up. Arthur was calling. I let it ring. The vibration buzzed loudly in the small room. Perhaps he was sitting in a hospital corridor. Right now, his mother unconscious nearby. Perhaps he was clutching that DNA test. Perhaps he had just lost the son he thought he had. The mistress he called. His wife, and was only now remembering his actual wife. The call ended. A text appeared. Ellie, I need to see you. I read it and locked the screen. Need. But not miss. Not sorry. Not are you. Okay. Arthur only ever needed me when his other options had run out. That night, I didn't sleep immediately. I made a mug of warm milk and sat by the warm milk window, watching the empty street below. The post-rain wind carried the smell of damp soil and fry-up grease from a distant cafe. In my belly, the baby was too small for me to feel anything, but keeping my hand there steadied me. Near 11 p.m., Oliver sent a final message. Tomorrow morning, Oakwell is sending a Prox representative to the meeting. I need to confirm. Do you want me to go in your place? I stared at the question. If this had been me a few months ago, I would have avoided it. Avoided Arthur, avoided Margaret, avoided the questioning stares, avoided hearing my full name called in a boardroom. But hiding forever only makes people think you can be erased. I typed slowly. No, I will go. A moment later, Oliver replied, I understand, I'll pick you up in the morning. I set the phone down and turned off the lamp. The room sank into darkness, illuminated only by a thin sliver of streetlight through the curtains. Somewhere, out there, Arthur might be sitting by his mother's hospital bed reading a text from Thomas. Arthur, Oakwell Holdings is sending a representative to the PayPal Blinks emergency meeting tomorrow. I woke up the next morning to my phone ringing. It was Harriet. The hotel room was still dark. I grabbed the phone, my eyes stinging from lack of sleep. I'm here, I said. Harriet's voice was tense, mixed with the sound of a car engine. Ellie, are you? At the hotel or out? I'm in my room. What's wrong? Margaret woke up, but she's not resting. Aunt Susan just texted the group. Margaret kicked up a massive fuss at the hospital, demanding Arthur take her shopping to clear her head. I genuinely can't comprehend it. I sat up and pulled the duvet over my shoulders. My lower abdomen wasn't painful, just feeling a bit heavy. On the table, my vitamins and a bottle of water were lined up neatly. She just fainted yesterday, I said. I know, but you know her. The more face she loses, the more she has to prove. She hasn't been beaten. It was so true I didn't know what to say. Margaret lived entirely for the blank Bations. Validation of others. Dinners had to be lavish so relatives would praise her. Cooking. Handbags had to be designer so friends knew her son was wealthy. The grandchild had to be a boy so the whole family knew she was blessed. When all of that collapsed, perhaps what she feared most wasn't losing money, but losing the title of the director's mother she had clung to for years. Don't follow her updates too closely, I said. Let them deal with their own mess. I know, but you should know because they'll probably drag your name into it. Those people never admit fault. After hanging up, I washed my face and went down for some porridge. The corner cafe was busier today. A Deliveroo rider was waiting, scrolling furiously on his phone. The owner handed me my bowl, glancing at the rider's screen, and muttered, Everything ends up on the internet so fast these days, it just happened and someone already filmed it. I didn't ask. I just paid, took my food, and went back up. By late morning, my phone vibrated rapidly. Not Arthur, not Margaret. It was Harriet sending a video link with a message. Watch this if you feel calm. Enough. If not, ignore it. I put my spoon down. The steam from the porridge blurred a corner of my screen. I tapped the video. It was filmed inside a luxury department store on Oxford Street. The angle was skewed, likely filmed by someone hiding behind a handbag display. Bright white. Lights gleamed on polished glass shelves. Margaret stood in the middle of the boutique, wearing a purple velvet dress and a silk scarf. Her face was still a bit swollen but heavily made up. Next to her was Arthur in a wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, holding his phone in one hand while trying to pull his mother back with the other. The sales assistant's voice in the video was polite but strained. "Madam, please understand the card has been declined. Would you like to try another card or pay via bank transfer?" Margaret snatched the black Amex back from the assistant. "Your machine is broken. Why would my card be declined? Do you know who I am?" The camera zoomed in. On the counter were 2 handbags wrapped in tissue paper. Next to them was a receipt. The total at the bottom was blurry, but it clearly read over £2,500. Not an amount that would bankrupt true wealth, but enough to severely embarrass someone accustomed to spending for status when rejected in public. The assistant kept a rigid smile. "I assure you, madam, our terminal is working perfectly. Shall I hold these items for you until you can arrange payment?" "Hold what?" Margaret barked. "If I want them, I pay for them now. Fetch your manager." A few shoppers turned to look. Someone recognized her. "Wait, isn't that the mother of the Kingsley Estates director? Aren't they going under? And she's still buying designer bags?" Her card actually got declined. The whispers were caught on camera, quiet but razor sharp. Margaret heard them. Her face went from flushed to chalk white. Arthur gritted his teeth and whispered something, probably begging her to leave, but she shoved his hand away. "What are you all looking at? Never seen people with money buy things before?" A woman standing nearby snapped back, not loud but clear. "If you have money, then pay. Why are you shouting at the retail staff?" It was like a needle bursting Margaret's final layer of armor. She whipped around, lips trembling, the hand holding her purse shaking. Arthur stepped in, front of her, telling the assistant, "I apologize, we won't be taking them." "What do you mean we aren't taking them?" Margaret yanked his arm. "Arthur, tell them to run it again. How could our accounts be frozen? Where is my money? Why? Won't my card work?" I stopped the video. The screen went black, reflecting my face. I looked at the woman on the screen for a moment. I didn't laugh. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt a strange emptiness. In the past, a single raised eyebrow from Margaret meant I had to figure out what to say to diffuse the tension at dinner. She loved being called refined, loved people thinking she had expensive taste. I used to trail behind her in Baquier, stores exactly like this one, carrying her bags, listening to staff call her Madam, while she introduced me by saying, "This is my daughter-in-law," a bit slow, but she listens well. Today, under the harsh white lights of a luxury boutique, she was screaming, "Where is my money?" like a child throwing a tantrum over a lost toy. But that money had never been solely hers. It had passed through many signatures, many contracts, many silences. Silences that I had once contributed to out of naive trust. Harriet's texts kept coming. She collapsed after that. Didn't faint completely, but Arthur had to carry her to the car. The video is already circulating in the Plosix Belvedere's residence group. I opened my old WhatsApp group for the apartment complex. The Belvedere T16. Friendly neighbors. I hadn't left it yet. Usually it was just notices about water shutoffs, parking fees, or noisy kids. Today, the messages were flying. Someone forwarded the video. Another asked, "Is that Arthur from flat 1608? A neighbor replied, "Yes. His wife moved out a few days ago. Must be family. Drama." Someone else chimed in, "I heard their company accounts got frozen by the bank. Supplementary cards declined." I read a few lines and muted the group. The very part of my life that once terrified me of becoming neighborhood gossip had ended up as gossip anyway, even though I was no longer there. The difference was, this time, I wasn't the one standing in the middle of a living room bowing my head in shame. That afternoon, Oliver sent an update from the bank. The supplementary credit, cards linked to the corporate guarantee packages, and the joint operational of accounts had been temporarily suspended pending the audit. Unrelated personal accounts were still active if they had their own funds, but the vast majority of Margaret's spending habits relied on corporate cash flow and cards issued by Arthur. I logged the details into my notebook without adding any commentary. Things built on dirty money make a deafening sound when they collapse. Around 5 p.m., Arthur called. His name flashed for the first time all day. I let it ring until it stopped. A text followed. "Are you satisfied now?" I stared at those 4 words. Satisfied? Did he think this was what I wanted? I wanted a husband to accompany me to my maternity scans. I wanted a home without another woman's slippers. I wanted a mother-in-law who didn't use fertility as a weapon. I wanted my signature not to be exploited under the guise of marriage. But a man like Arthur always asks the easiest question to frame himself as the victim. I didn't reply. That evening, Harriet brought me a container of chicken broth. She didn't ask. For my room number, just texted, "Come down to the lobby. I'm standing outside." She knew I still needed a boundary, even with family. I put my coat on and went down. She was standing under the awning, holding an insulated bag, her hair damp from the drizzle. As soon as she saw me, she frowned. "You've lost weight." "I'm eating. Hotel food doesn't count. Home cooked does." She handed me the bag, low fat, extra ginger. I asked a doctor friend. "It's good for early pregnancy." I froze. Harriet looked at me, her eyes reddening, but she kept her voice low. "Did you think I wouldn't guess?" "I didn't press you because I knew you weren't ready, but from now on, you don't do this alone." I gripped the handles of the bag. In that few seconds, everything I had been trying to keep tightly sealed inside me suddenly went soft, not because I was weak, but because someone knew I was in pain and didn't force me to put it on display. "Don't tell anyone," I whispered. "I know." Harriet reached out and fixed my collar. "The baby is your business. Whoever deserves to know will know eventually." That night, I finished half the bowl of broth. It was warm, with a spicy kick of ginger. After eating, I slept deeper and longer than I had in days. The next morning, Oliver forwarded the official email from Oakwell Holdings. Attached was the formal invitation to the risk management meeting with Kingsley Estates, the bank, and associated partners. I opened the file on my laptop. At the bottom, under the signatory line, it read, "Eleanor Grace Turner, authorized. Representative for Capital and Contract Oversight, Oakwell Holdings." I stared at my name for a long time. It felt both familiar and strange. It wasn't the Ellie my mother-in-law barked when she wanted the table cleared. It wasn't the Ellie Arthur used when he needed a document signed. Eleanor Grace Turner sat on that document as a reminder that I had an identity before I became someone's wife, and I still had one after leaving them. The invitation was sent at 9:17 a.m. At 9:32 a.m., Arthur called. 15 minutes, just enough time for him to read the email, see my job title, perhaps, call Thomas, and rack his brain to remember exactly when the wife he thought belonged only in the kitchen was granted the authority to summon banks and corporate partners to a boardroom table. My phone vibrated next to the blue folder Oliver had just delivered. I watched Arthur's name flash. I didn't answer. The call ended, and a text arrived. Immediately. "Eleanor Grace Turner, what is this?" I smiled. Not because it was a stupid question, but because after nearly 4 years of marriage, my husband was asking, "What is this?" upon seeing my full legal name on a corporate document. A moment later, he texted again. "What exactly are you doing at Oakwell? On what authority are you calling this meeting? Ellie, answer me." I turned off notifications and put the phone in the drawer. The hotel was quiet. This morning, the hum of a vacuum cleaner drifted down the hall, the rattle of a housekeeping trolley, someone calling out to go down for breakfast. These small sounds tethered me to the present, preventing me from being dragged down by Arthur's interrogation. On the table, the blue folders were neatly stacked. Oliver had prepared thoroughly. Stack 1, my authorization documents from Oakwell. Stack 2, the banges, guarantee contracts, joint accounts, and bank freeze requests. Stack 3, personal evidence regarding my marriage. Screenshots of the grandson dinner, Margaret's transcribed voice notes, the Jojo Mom and Bebe receipt with Chloe's name, and the draft divorce petition. I didn't want to mix the two. Business is business. Marriage is marriage. But when Arthur used the facade of family to force me to sign off on corporate tests, risks, when his mother used my status as a daughter-in-law to force me into submission, they were the ones who blurred the lines. Today, I was just going to redraw them. Oliver arrived at 10 a.m. He didn't come up to the room waiting in the hotel's ground floor cafe. I brought the folders down. He stood up when he saw me, his eyes scanning my face before landing on the documents. Did you sleep? A bit. Eaten? Yes. Harriet brought chicken broth last night, and I had toast this morning. Oliver nodded, asking no further. On the table was a hot ginger tea. He pushed it towards me, ordered it in advance. Wasn't sure if you could stomach it. I can. I took the cup, the warmth seeping into my palms. Thank you. A brief silence fell between us. Oliver opened his laptop to review the attendee list. The bank rep, partners from Ashford and Greenwich, Thomas, as VP of Operations, Arthur as Director of Kingsley, and Margaret, if she retained her position as family shareholder. For Oakwell, it would be me, Oliver, and an Oakwell independent auditor. I sent the agenda in advance, Oliver said, mainly focused on capital, expenditure receipts, and accountability. Your marital issues will only be brought up if Arthur or Margaret deliberately use personal matters to undermine your authority. I nodded. I don't want to turn a boardroom into a domestic screaming match. I know, but you need to be prepared if they do. From the day I married Arthur, I've spent more time preparing for his mother's insults than I have for any corporate meeting, I said, only realizing how bitter it sounded after the words left my mouth. Tomorrow probably won't be much different. Oliver looked at me without smiling. It will be. Tomorrow you aren't walking in there begging for their acceptance. That sentence made the tea in my hands feel even warmer. At noon, I went for my follow-up scan. Harriet insisted on coming. She wore a brown coat, carrying a tote bag with a thermos, plain biscuits, and tissues, looking more like a protective sister taking a sibling to an exam than a hospital visit. The maternity ward was busy. I sat on a plastic chair watching couples, mothers, and single women like me. Harriet sat next to me, occasionally, pressing a biscuit into my hand. Eat. Don't let yourself get hungry. I just had lunch. Lunch was lunch. This is now. I chuckled softly, the first genuine light laugh I'd had in days. When it was my turn, Harriet waited outside. The ultrasound room was cool, white, lights washing the pale walls. The doctor applied the gel, and the screen displayed confusing blobs of light and dark. I lay perfectly still, clutching the edge of my top, my breathing slower than usual. Fetal development matches the gestational age, the doctor said. Nothing abnormal yet, but you're a bit tense, aren't you? I bit my lip. Yes, I've had a lot going on these past few days. Try to rest. Early pregnancy is highly sensitive. Whatever the adults are going through, try not to let your body take the full brunt of it. The second scan was printed out. I took it, putting it into my personal folder, strictly separate from the corporate files. This child was not a piece of evidence to throw on a boardroom table. It was the reason I was not allowed to collapse. Outside, Harriet jumped up. Well? All good. She breathed a sigh of relief, her eyes watering so fast she had to turn away. Good is enough. From now on, you put yourself first. As for that family, let them burn. In the hospital corridor, a toddler waddled past, clutching a rabbit balloon. His mother called from behind. Slow down, you'll fall. The balloon bumped gently into my shoulder and bounced off. The child turned and mumbled a tiny, sorry. I bent down and smiled. That's okay. It was a fleeting moment, but it softened my heart. Over the past few days, I had hardened myself to handle everything, leaving, gathering evidence, signing legal documents, preparing for a corporate war, but beneath it all, there was blanks. Still a part of me that just wanted to sit quietly, eat a hot meal, and hear someone say that everything would be all right. That evening, a text from Arthur popped up. I'm downstairs at your hotel. Can we talk privately? My heart skipped a beat. I stood up, walked to the window, and cracked the boardie curtain. Down on the pavement, Arthur's car was parked under a tree. He stood next to it in a black coat, holding his phone in one hand and an unlit cigarette in the other. From the fourth floor, he looked so much smaller than my memory of him in our old flat. Another text arrived. I know I was wrong, but you can't just let outsiders interfere in our marriage. I stared at the words, my finger hovering over the desk. Outsiders. Oliver was an outsider handling the documents Arthur falsified. The bank was an outsider freezing anomalous funds. The auditor was an outsider demanding receipts. And Chloe, the woman he carried into A&E and called his wife, was supposedly an insider. I didn't go down. Arthur called me, letting it ring 3 times before sending a longer text. Ellie, I didn't know you had this kind of authority at Oakwell. You never told me. If you had told me, things would have been different. That sentence made me freeze. If I had told him, things would have been different. Meaning, if he knew I had more value than a stay-at-home wife, he would have weighed the risks before betraying me. If he knew my signature could freeze his accounts, he wouldn't have let those pink slippers cross our threshold. If he knew I couldn't be easily tossed aside, he would have been a bit kinder. So was that kindness meant for me as a person, or for the leverage I held? I opened the chat, typed one sentence, and sent it. See you tomorrow in the boardroom. Down on the street, Arthur looked down at his phone. From this distance, I couldn't see his face, but I saw his shoulders slump. A moment later, he looked up at the hotel windows, but the curtains were already drawn closed. I let go of the fabric. The night before the meeting, I didn't spend much time reviewing the files. Oliver had vetted them perfectly. What needed to be said was on paper. What shouldn't be said, no matter how much it hurt, had to remain behind closed doors. I packed the blue folders into my bag and laid out a crisp white blouse and black tailored trousers. No expensive designer wear, no flashy jewelry. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to prove I was better than anyone. I was just going to reclaim the righteousness they had misplaced. Before bed, I placed the second ultrasound scan next to the first one. 2 thin pieces of paper lay side by side under the bedside lamp. One from the day I was relegated to an outsider. One from the day I decided to walk into a boardroom. Using my full legal name, I gently touched my stomach. Mummy will be fine. Tomorrow. I don't know if you can hear me, but saying it out loud helped me. Sleep. London traffic the next morning was heavy but moving. I sat in the back of the cab, the blue folders on my lap, my hands resting lightly on top. Oliver sat in the passenger seat, occasionally reviewing the presentation order, his voice steady and firm. The Kingsley Estates building was in a modest business park, featuring a blue glass facade and a marble lobby. I had been here a few times since marrying Arthur, mostly to drop off lunch or documents he forgot. The receptionist always called me Mrs. Arthur and directed me to wait on the lobby sofa. Today, as I walked in, the young receptionist checked her guest list, her eyes widening slightly. Ah, you're the representative from Oakwell Holdings, correct? I nodded. Yes. The large boardroom was at the end of the corridor. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes. Arthur sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid. Margaret sat next to him, her face pale, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Thomas stood near the projector, clutching a remote, looking highly agitated. Oliver turned to me and whispered, "Ready?" I looked down at the blue folder. The stiff cardboard edge felt coldly real. Ready. The boardroom door swung open, and the conversation inside died instantly. Arthur looked up. His eyes hit me first, then dropped to the folder in my hands. Margaret turned, her exhausted face suddenly pulling tight as if she couldn't tear. I believe her eyes. I walked in behind Oliver and the auditor, my heels clicking softly against the floor. Arthur sat at the head of the table. His white shirt was ironed, but his cuffs were slightly crooked, as if thrown on in a rush. His face was gaunter than when I last saw him at the hospital. His eyes stared at me, stunned, angry, and harboring something that looked almost like pleading. Margaret sat next to him. A few days ago, she had stood in a luxury boutique, screaming for her money. Today, she was quieter. But that silence wasn't calm. It was like a boiling pot with a clamped lid, waiting for a crack to explode. Thomas avoided our gaze as we walked in. The bank representatives sat on the left, next to the Ashford and Greenwich partners. Oliver placed the blue folder in front of me. Sit here. I pulled out the chair directly opposite Arthur. I sat down and adjusted my war blouse cuffs. Inside my handbag, the ultrasound scan rested in its separate compartment, entirely segregated from the documents on the table. I knew I was carrying two truths. One for this boardroom to face, and one that belonged to one else but me. Arthur spoke first. "Ellie, explain yourself." No greeting, no asking how I was, just the familiar commanding tone. Only this. Time. He wasn't looking at the dining table in our flat, but a boardroom filled with auditors, bankers, and partners. I looked at him. "Today, I am here as the authorized representative of Oakwell Holdings regarding contracts involving Kingsley Estates. If we need to discuss personal matters, we will do so later, through the appropriate channels." Margaret let out a sharp, dry scoff. "You're very clever, aren't you? Eleanor, after years as my daughter-in-law, you hid this well. Turns out you know how to scheme behind your husband's back." Oliver leaned forward, his voice completely level. "Mrs. Margaret, I suggest we keep this strictly professional. We are here to discuss guarantee contracts and capital expenditure receipts." Margaret slammed her hand on the table. The water bottles wobbled. "I am speaking to my daughter-in-law. Why are you interrupting?" I placed my hands on the blue folder, my fingertips brushing the cold edge. "Mrs. Margaret, in this room you should address me as the representative of Oakwell Holdings. If you wish to speak to me as a daughter-in-law, I can have a lector parters it. Divorce petition sent to you after this meeting." The room plunged into dead silence. Arthur looked at me, his lips pressed into a gay, tight line. He had probably anticipated the divorce papers, but hearing me say it so bluntly drained the color from his face. Margaret froze for a beat, then her eyes flared with rage. "You wouldn't dare!" I didn't reply. Some questions don't require answers because the documents will speak louder than any words. The bank representative spoke up to steer the meeting back on track. He projected a summary spreadsheet onto the screen. "At the request of Oakwell Holdings, and pursuant to the joint control clauses in the addendum, the bank has temporarily suspended several disbursements for the Ashford and Greenwich projects. The reason being anomalous payment vouchers requiring supplementary verification." Thomas stood up, his voice slightly hoarse. "Kingsley Estates has received the claused request, and we are compiling the explanatory documents." Oliver opened the first stack of files. "We have conducted a preliminary review and identified 3 core issues requiring clarification. Payments to suppliers, not on the initial approved list, material pricing significantly above market rates at the time, and several consultancy invoices lacking substantive deliverables." The screen switched to a ledger. The numbers lined up, cold and detached, with a few red highlighted cells adding to the chill in the room. The Greenwich rep frowned. "Who is this supplier, Min Thiern? They weren't in the initial pitch." Thomas looked at Arthur. Arthur stared at the screen, his voice stiff. "That was an additional supplier brought on due to project schedule changes. As for pricing, the market was volatile at the time." Oliver didn't argue verbally. He placed another stack of papers on the table, pushing them toward the bank and partners. "These are 3 quotes from alternative suppliers on the exact same dates. The variance falls far outside standard market fluctuation. Furthermore, the legal representative of Min Thiern is Mrs. Margaret's cousin. This relationship was not disclosed during the plighter's procurement process." All eyes in the room swiveled to Margaret. Her face paled slightly, but she kept her voice loud. "So what if he's my cousin? In business, you use people you trust. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." The bank rep scribbled something in his notebook. The Ashford partners murmured to each other. Arthur gritted his teeth. "Mother, please, stop talking." That made Margaret snap her head toward him. "You're telling me to shut up? Would this company even be here if it weren't for me?" An old, exhausted part of me felt a sudden wave of fatigue. Over the past few years, arguments like this usually ended with me getting up to pour water, clear the table, or offer soothing words to keep the peace. Today, I sat completely still. My glass of water remained untouched. Nobody needed me to clean up their mess anymore. Oliver moved on to the next set of documents. Each item was backed by copies of contracts, invoices, payment slips, and approval emails. Arthur's signature was everywhere, some handwritten, some digital. When a spreadsheet detailing market Development consultancy was projected, the bank rep asked. What exactly did the recipient of these funds deliver? Thomas couldn't answer immediately. Arthur spun a pen between his fingers. A gesture I knew meant he was losing his temper. The accounts department handled those minor payments. I can't remember every trivial detail. Oliver looked at him. But the final approval email came directly from you. Arthur turned to me. Ellie, do you really have to push it this far? That question dragged everyone's gaze toward me. I looked at him, feeling incredibly strange. The man sitting across from me was once the person I wanted to tell first about my pregnancy. I used to place my hand on my stomach at the hospital, imagining his smile. Yet now, in this freezing boardroom, he wasn't asking why I was hurt. He was asking why I wouldn't stop. I'm not pushing anything. My voice was low but clear. The documents go where the responsibility lies. Arthur gave a hollow laugh. You're just doing this for revenge because of Chloe. Margaret immediately latched onto that like a lifeline. Exactly, you're jealous, so you're trying to destroy him. You couldn't get pregnant, and seeing someone else have a son drove you mad. Now that the baby isn't Arthur's, you're absolutely thrilled, aren't you? Oliver opened his mouth to intervene, but I held up a hand. I opened the third folder. I pulled out printed screenshots and laid them on the table one by one. The photo of the grandson dinner, the family WhatsApp messages, the transcript of Margaret's voice note, the Jojo Maman Bebe receipt with Chloe's name, and, finally, the photo of the pink fluffy slippers on my shoe rack, taken the night I left. The matter with Chloe is a marital issue. I have enough evidence to handle that via divorce proceedings. I don't need to use corporate contracts for revenge. I looked at Margaret. You once said that women who can't bear children should know their place, but a mother who uses fertility to humiliate another woman, only to place all her faith in a child who doesn't even share her blood. Margaret's mouth opened, but no words came out. Arthur stared at the papers on the table. When he saw the photo of the dinner, his face darkened completely. Perhaps, for the very first time, he was seeing that scene through my eyes. His legal wife vanishes, his mother's living room is brightly lit, and his mistress sits in the center holding a baby. The adults laughing, using my silence to construct a fake victory. Why didn't you tell me? Arthur asked, his voice dropping. If you had told me you had authority at Oakwell, if you had told me you knew all this, I cut him off. Did I only deserve your respect if I held power over you? That question fell softly, but it silenced Arthur completely. His hands rested on the table, knuckles white. In that moment, he was no longer the man rushing Chloe into A&E, nor was he the director of Kingsley Estates. He was just a man, realizing he had severely misjudged the only person who had ever stood by him, unconditionally. But realizing it late doesn't erase the damage. I took the final envelope from my bag and placed it in front of Arthur. It was blank. He stared at it for a few seconds before opening it. The signed divorce petition. The boardroom went dead silent again. Margaret lunged forward to snatch it, but Oliver blocked her hand. Mrs. Margaret, please do not touch personal legal documents. Personal what? Margaret hissed. I don't agree to this. It's not her turn to just up and leave this family whenever she pleases. I looked at her, entirely unafraid. My marriage is between Arthur and me. You don't have the right to agree on his behalf. Arthur held the petition, his eyes locked on my signature. A long time passed before he spoke. Ellie, I was wrong. That apology came so late I didn't know where to put it. If it had come in the apology came so late. Hospital corridor, I might have cried. If it had come when I saw the pink slippers, I might have asked why. If it had come before the grandson dinner, there might have been a tiny sliver of a chance. But now, on the table lay evidence of financial fraud. Under his hand lay divorce papers. And behind us were people waiting for accountability. Arthur stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He walked around the table and stopped in front of me. For a few seconds, I thought he might explode or tear up the files like he used to when he lost control. But he just leaned down, his voice cracking. I know I don't deserve it, but can you give me one more chance? Let's start over. I'll cut everything off with Chloe. The company made mistakes. I'll fix them. My mother. I'll talk to my mother. Behind him, Margaret burst into tears. Arthur, why are you begging her? After? She humiliated this family, you still. Arthur spun around, his voice shattering. Mother, shut up! It was the first time in 4 years I heard Arthur say that to his mother. Not to protect me, but because everything had gone too far. Lateness has a very distinct sound. I stood up. Oliver stood too, but stepped back half a pace. Arthur. I called his name. Not darling, not husband. It's too late. Not because I'm over the pain, but because I'm out of trust. Arthur's eyes turned red. He reached out as if to grab my wrist, but stopped. Midair. Perhaps he remembered there were outsiders in the room. Or perhaps for the first time, he realized I was no longer the woman who would soften at his touch. I gathered my personal documents, leaving the corporate files for Oliver to finish up. The bank representative requested formal minutes of the meeting be drawn up. The parties signed to confirm the required supplementary actions. Thomas slumped in his chair, his face ashen. Margaret clutched her chest, panting heavily. But this time, no one rushed over to help her. The minutes were printed on the spot. The printer whirred loudly out in the recess. Our hallway. I signed on behalf of Oakwell Holdings. Arthur signed for Kingsley Estates. His signature was no longer sweeping. It broke at the end of the granite stroke, like an overstretched string snapping. When the meeting concluded, I grabbed my bag and stood up. Arthur was still watching me. Ellie, he called. I stopped, but didn't turn around fully. Where are you staying? I just want to know if you're safe. Another belated question. I am safe, I replied. And I intend to stay that way. The boardroom doors opened, and the air in the corridor felt slightly warmer. Employees lingering nearby quickly scattered. As I walked past them, I heard the frantic arguments erupting behind me. Partners demanding explanations, the bank, mentioning the legal department, Margaret crying, Arthur yelling at Thomas for more files. Those sounds were sealed away as the doors closed. My phone vibrated just as I reached the lift. The screen showed St. Jude's Hospital. My heart skipped a beat. Before I answered, Hello, Eleanor? The nurse's voice was gentle. The doctor asked me to let you know your blood test results from yesterday are perfect. Remember to take your on vitamins. Stay relaxed and try not to stress. See you at your next scan. I leaned softly against the steel wall of the lift. The metal doors reflected my pale face, but it wasn't broken. Yes, thank you. The call ended. Oliver stood next to me, looking but not asking. I slipped the phone into my bag, my hand instinctively resting on my stomach. Back in that boardroom, an old life was dismantling itself piece by piece. But out here, between the opening lift doors and the dim light of the corridor, a very small heartbeat remained perfectly at peace. On the day the court summoned us to receive the decree nisi, London was sunny. Not the dazzling sunshine you see in films, just a thin, watery light after a night of rain, making the puddles on the court steps gleam. I arrived 10 minutes early. Oliver came with me, carrying a document folder. Harriet stood outside the gates, holding a bag of tangerines and a thermos, absolutely refusing to let me go alone while I still had mild morning sickness. Arthur arrived later. He wore a gray shirt, looking significantly thinner than a few months ago. His hair was cut short, dark circles under his eyes. Walking through the gates, he saw me first. His steps slowed, and he approached, keeping a respectful distance. How are you? That question didn't hurt anymore, probably because it arrived when I no longer needed it. I'm well. Arthur looked at the folder in Oliver's hand, then over at Harriet, standing a few feet away. He looked like he wanted to say more, but the clerk called our names before he could open his mouth. The process was quicker than I expected. A few pages were read out. The joint assets had been settled via written agreement. The liabilities concerned Kingsley Estates had been legally severed from me. Under children, the petition stated none, as I had not disclosed the pregnancy, and my solicitor had advised on the right time to reveal it to protect me from unnecessary load to cam. Custody disputes right now. It was a difficult decision, but one I made after many sleepless nights. When signing the decree, my finger lingered for a second on my name. Eleanor Grace Turner. That name on a divorce paper wasn't as sad as I once thought. It was clear and clean, like a door swinging open after being stuck for a long time. Arthur signed after me. His handwriting trembled slightly. As we left the room, he walked behind me and called softly, "Ellie." I stopped in the corridor. He pulled a small box from his coat pocket, a dark red, velvet box with worn edges. My wedding ring was inside, the ring I had left on the bedside table the night I walked out. He had kept it for months. Arthur's voice was hoarse. "I thought there might be a day I could give this back to you directly, or, I don't know, today seems like the day." I looked at the ring. The small metal band had hugged my ring finger for nearly 4 years. It had gone with me to the supermarket, cooked dinners, signed documents, attended hospital appointments alone. It had gripped a damp cloth. When my mother-in-law complained the house wasn't clean enough, it had witnessed far more than any piece of jewelry ever should. But in the end, it was just a ring. "I will have my solicitor collect it and process it with the rest of the personal files," I said. Arthur's eyes darkened. He nodded and handed the box to Oliver. He didn't try to plead further. Perhaps, after all the chaos, he had finally learned that grasping too tightly only makes you look pathetic. Outside the court gates, Harriet handed me the thermos. "Done. It's done." She looked at me for a moment, then pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a soft hug. It was slightly awkward and very tight. I rested my forehead on her shoulder, smelling her familiar shampoo mixed with the scent of rainwater on her coat. I didn't cry. Tears aren't always proof of pain. Some days, you just want to stand in a long embrace to know you've finally made it through. Following the divorce, the situation at Kingsley Estates progressed exactly as the documents predicted. The bank handed the case to their legal department. The Ashford and Greenwich partners suspended their contracts and demanded compensation for delays. The independent auditors confirmed multiple misappropriations of funds, undocumented invoices, and undisclosed transactions with related parties. Arthur lost his executive control even before the authorities formally stepped in. I heard this news from Oliver one afternoon at the Oakwell Holdings office. He placed the update on my desk without commentary. I read the main points and closed the file. "Are all the parts involving me fully separated?" I asked. "Yes," Oliver replied. "Any liabilities stemming from Kingsley Estates' internal decisions will not affect you. Oakwell has also successfully recalled the planks as 11 STI, unexecuted guarantees." Outside the glass windows of the office, the late spring sky was clear. The Oakwell building wasn't very tall, but from my temporary desk, I could see a row of trees just starting to bud with fresh green leaves. I had returned to the company not to a round of applause or admiring stares, but simply on a normal morning. I walked past reception, got my new ID badge, sat at my desk, and opened pending files. That normalcy was more precious than any grand entrance. Occasionally, people still looked at me a bit longer than usual. The news that I was Arthur's ex-wife, the one who signed off on freezing the Kingsley guarantees, had inevitably circulated in certain business circles. But Oakwell was a place where work came before gossip. No one asked if I felt vindicated, no. One told me I was so strong. Sometimes those questions exhaust a person more than silence does. After the collapse of Kingsley Estates, Margaret moved in with her sister. Harriet heard from relatives that she rarely went out, no longer showing off handbags, her grandson, or her successful son. In the family WhatsApp group, the people who had once joined her in insulting me gradually went quiet. No one texted an apology, and I wasn't waiting for one. Chloe took her baby and left London. Mr. Sterling hadn't taken responsibility as she had hoped. I later heard a rumor that she moved back to her hometown to work, in a small cosmetics shop. I listened and let it go. The baby was innocent, and the adults had chosen their own paths. Arthur texted me many times. At first, long paragraphs. He detailed how the company was under investigation, how his mother was depressed, how he realized what a fool he had been. Once he texted at 2 a.m. "I remember the day you put our wedding photo face down. Every time I think about it, I can't breathe." Other times, just one sentence: "I am so sorry." I didn't reply, not to punish him, but because what would be the point? If his remorse was genuine, that was his burden to carry. I no longer had any obligation to sue the man who only felt the pain when the consequences landed on himself. I put his number on mute. Everything else was handled by solicitors. My life shrank down to concrete, manageable things. Eating breakfast on time, taking my vitamins, working half days, coming home to rest, attending my scans, on schedule. There were days when the morning sickness was so bad, even the smell of warm rice made me nauseous. Harriet laughed, said the baby was fussy like its mother, and brought over homemade pumpkin soup. I rented a small flat near the office. Not huge, but it had a balcony big enough for 2 potted plants. On moving day, Harriet helped me mop the floors. Oliver had someone deliver a neat filing cabinet. Mrs. Higgins even texted to ask if I had settled in. I called her and invited her over for tea when she was free. She came on a Saturday afternoon bringing a bag of oranges. "It's very bright in here, Mrs. Eleanor." Mrs. Higgins stood in the doorway, looking around. "Feels warmer than the old house." I chuckled. "The old house had a lot more stuff, Mrs. Higgins." "A lot of stuff doesn't mean it's warm," she replied honestly. That sentence made me pause, then smile. I brewed some ginger tea and poured it into 2 new ceramic mugs I'd bought from the supermarket. Mrs. Higgins told me she had taken a cleaning job at a small office, good bosses, set hours. I asked, after her daughter and packed some of Harriet's homemade biscuits for her to take home. Before leaving, she looked at me, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Eleanor, Arthur asked me recently how you were doing. I didn't give him your address. I just told him you were fine." "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. Don't blame me for being a busybody. He looks terrible." I placed a hand on my stomach, which was just beginning to show a tiny bump, beneath my loose dress. "We all have to live with the choices we make, Mrs. Higgins." She looked at my stomach, her eyes widening slightly. I didn't shy away. She understood but didn't ask, only softening her voice. "Then you must stay happy. The baby needs its mother to be happy." After she left, the flat settled back into quiet. I stood on the balcony, watering my 2 plants, a snake plant and some rosemary. The snake plant was the same type as before, but this time I bought it for myself. Not because of anyone else's offhand comment. The stiff leaves pointed straight up, their yellow edges looking incredibly resilient in the afternoon sun. My 1-2-week scan fell on a windy morning. Harriet came with me. Street Jude's. Hospital was as busy as the first day. The blue plastic chairs, the tannoy, the familiar smell of antiseptic. I walked past the maternity A and E, my steps slowing. Slightly. Right there, a few months ago, Arthur had sprinted past holding Chloe, calling her his wife. Today, the corridor was still noisy. A husband struggling to fill out admission. Forms for his wife. A mother-in-law carrying a bag of newborn clothes. A young girl clutching her stomach and grimacing. No one knew my story had shattered. Right here, and no one needed to know. Harriet touched my elbow. "All right?" "I'm all right." This time, lying on the ultrasound bed, I heard the heartbeat. The sound was rapid, small, and rhythmic, like the thrum of horse hooves galloping down a distant road. The doctor smiled. "Heartbeat is strong, baby is developing perfectly." I looked at the screen. The image hadn't formed into a clear face yet, but it was no longer the 6-week speck. Something inside my chest melted, and the hands gripping the edge of my top slowly relaxed. Harriet stood next to me, turning her head away to wipe her tears. I just lay still, letting that sound wash over me. Walking out of the clinic, I received a text from an unknown number. I didn't need to save it to know it was Arthur. "I heard you're pregnant. Is the baby?" The text stopped there. Maybe he typed it and deleted the rest, or didn't know how to finish it. I looked at the screen for a moment. Harriet noticed my expression change. "Who? Is it?" "Nobody important." I deleted the message, didn't block it immediately, but didn't reply. Some truths need to be handled with the law, with timing, with proper protection for the child, not through an impulsive text exchange in a hospital corridor. When it was time, the solicitors would inform him. Until then, I would guard my own peace. Stepping out of the hospital gates, the sun draped over my shoulders. A flower vendor on the pavement was arranging small bunches of white daisies mixed with purple asters. Harriet asked me what I wanted to eat. I thought about it seriously for a moment. I'd really love a hot bowl of seafood chowder. "Oh, thank God, you finally have an appetite," she laughed, pulling my arm. Across the street, my treat. I followed her, one hand holding my bag, the other resting lightly over my stomach. The hospital faded behind us. The cold corridor, the phrase, "My wife is about to give birth," the pink slippers, the grandson dinner, the glass, boardroom, the divorce petition, they were all still there in my memory. I didn't deny them. They had hurt me, made me feel insignificant and isolated, but they no longer possessed the power to drag me backwards. We found a cozy pub tucked down a side street. Wooden tables, the rich, steaming smell of creamy broth and fresh bread wafting through the air. Harriet ordered, "Prepare me a large bowl," asking the server to make sure the seafood was fully cooked. I sat on a slightly worn wooden chair, watching the stream of people pass by the window. A young couple rode past on a Vespa, the girl on the back, holding a bouquet of flowers, tilting her head and laughing against the wind. That scene reminded me of the afternoon I left the hospital the first time, when I looked through the cab window and thought I had lost everything. It turns out I hadn't lost everything. I just walked out of the wrong house and kept the most vital, living part of myself. Yes, some departures are quiet, yet they represent a woman claiming her final shred of self-respect. In marriage, the most terrifying thing isn't just betrayal, but when someone invokes family to force a person into silence over their own trauma. Eleanor didn't choose to fight back with vicious words, nor did she turn her pain into blind revenge. She chose to stand tall, keep the evidence, maintain her rationale, and preserve her decency for her unborn child. Karma doesn't always strike like lightning. Sometimes it arrives through every signature, every word, and every wrong choice a person makes. If you were in this situation, how would you choose to face it? Don't forget to leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to our channel to hear more profound, real-life stories.